Hello again, dear students. Monday, hopefully early, maybe not. I know you've got other classes that you are taking care of. So good to see you either way. I'm going to start off by giving you just a few general announcements, and then I have some things that I've been contemplating over the past few weeks, really things I've contemplated over the past few years that I want to start sharing with you guys during this time that we have to maybe step back and contemplate a little bit more as to why we are here. So I'm going to start off by just reminding you that today your video and attendance question are on the class wall. Obviously, you found the video, so make sure you answer that attendance question. Also, your independent novel reveal assignment is due today, so make sure that you've got your novel picked out and that your parents have approved it and that they have emailed me to know that approval, and I will approve it as well. You'll also have a paragraph that you'll be writing. So TSN supports on that. You'll check the composition section. And then you've got some other deadlines throughout the week that I just want to highlight quickly as we're getting used to a new format. So Act 1 assignment that I showed you all last week, that's due tomorrow, Tuesday, March 31st. Your reading schedule, again, you can turn that in early, but it's due Wednesday, April 1st at the latest. We'll have our first quiz for our town, Acts 1 and 2 on Wednesday. Again, that will be a very simple open book quiz. And I've added a discussion board. It's not due until Thursday, but I wanted to provide you some time to discuss with each other throughout the week. So you can go ahead and look at that question today. I would advise that just so you've got some time for it to stew around in your brain and for you to answer the post. And then you also need to respond to 2 other posts from your classmates. So you'll also want to read the discussion board etiquette information there. Finally, this week we've got our Town Act 3 quiz on Friday. Again, very simple, probably about 10 questions. A little bit more long term, we have a creative assignment. Some of you all may have already checked out. That's due April 7th. So you've got a little bit of time for that. But again, just so that you've got a heads up and have that stirring around in your mind, especially as you read the play. And then vocabulary, I know some of you have had questions about that. We're going to start Unit 10 this week and have 2 weeks, actually a little bit longer because of Good Friday. So the quiz will be on Monday, April 13th, since the 10th is Good Friday. And I'm going to post today some small practice review assignments for you to choose from. So there'll be options where if you want to go ahead and still do book assignments, that's fine. But I'll have some online opportunities as well for you to review and just get your normal little, completion grade for that. I also want to take the time that I have with you guys in these videos, I mentioned this a little bit before, to talk about some of the heart behind what we do. So we're going to discuss some things that I've learned and I'm still learning over the past few years through classical Christian education, both as a teacher and as a student. So I'm going to talk about leisure. Just a quick tidbit for today. Leisure comes from the Greek word, Latin word skole, which has to do with leisure, and it's where we get our word for school. So that's probably a surprising thing. Most people probably don't think of school and leisure going together, but at the core, at the heart of a liberal arts education, it really is supposed to be. We're again going to tackle goodness, truth, and beauty and worldview. And I'm going to talk a little bit about just classical ways of thinking, a dialectic conversational way, and how that's going to look online. So that's just a little preview into some things this week. I looked at your concerns and your excitements in regards to online learning at home, and I just wanted to share some feedback with you guys on that, especially maybe even sharing a little bit more about my own excitements and likes and dislikes and concerns that I have. So first, I'm going to start off with the good stuff. I enjoy the opportunity to be creative and think outside of the box. And often when you have to rearrange things that you're forced into thinking a little bit more creatively. So I enjoy that. I've enjoyed getting to see other teachers and staff, and I look forward to seeing students being more creative as well. So you get to see the inventiveness of other people. So looking at other teachers' videos, looking at my assignments and rethinking those. Even the night show has been able to showcase some different ways of boosting morale, but also of creatively expressing the things that we want to do here at Providence. I really enjoy getting to see my family more and not having to get up so early in order to drive an hour and 10 minutes. And I can do so much more with the 2 hours and 20 minutes a day during this time, like make videos. I get to enjoy being outside. I really missed the sun, especially in the month of February. There were some days I didn't see the sun at all because I'm in the heart of the school with no windows, and I leave early and arrive at school early, and then I would leave the school sometimes after the sun was starting to go down. So it's nice to be able to get to see the sunshine. So I miss you guys too. There's something that's really obviously lost with just not having your presence and being able to interact with you guys. And just a little tidbit into why that's so important for me. A few years ago, when I was teaching at my other school, I thought, well, maybe I'd like to work with kids more in administration, an administrative role of some sort where I would still get to interact with them, but I wouldn't have to do things like grade. And I was thinking about that for a little while, and then I had one of the worst school nightmares ever. So teachers have nightmares about, like running late to school, or, not having lesson plans. Or one time I dreamed that students were allowed to vote whether I stayed or went, and they all voted me off, like on Survivor, and it was really terrible. And I cried and woke up, and it was bad. But one of my worst memorable nightmares about teaching was actually not being able to teach and not being able to interact with my students. I dreamed, this is probably more information than what you want to know about my mind, but I dreamed that I had an administrative role and I was working at my desk, and there was a droid teaching my students, and it was just reading off this book. It was so boring, and that's all it was doing. And this one kid had a question, and of course it was a robot, so it wasn't answering anything, and then I couldn't do anything about it, and it was absolutely terrible. So I miss you guys a lot. That's just a small little indication as to how much you all mean to me. um, Missing the natural flow of a conversation and the organic way of speaking and teaching. And yeah, you all have mentioned that the communication is definitely different. We have to be more intentional and work harder. And often the way that it works naturally is you think of a question, you ask it, or I say something and then someone asks to clarify, and then I'm able to do that. Well, it's a totally different format, so that's a learning curve for me. And in fact, it reminded me of something that I'm reading in my master's program. A guy named Plato um, wrote, there's a short little snippet from one of his dialogues where he's talking about the superiority of the spoken to the written word. And the first time I heard that, I was actually offended as an English teacher and a writer. I was like, how can you think that the spoken word's better than the written word? And I read it and I was like, oh, I get what he's saying. And he was arguing for dialogue and dialectic and getting to look at the person who is communicating and say, well, why do you think that? What do you mean here? And have that back and forth, which is really what makes the classroom beautiful. So that's one thing we're going to focus on as we have to switch from discussing in class to discussion boards and what that looks like. And thankfully, and I've still got ways to learn this, but thankfully I've been part of a master's program where we do that. We alternate having a live class and discussion posts and what that looks like. So I'll be able to share some things that I've learned over the past few years to help maybe make that a little more fruitful for us. A lot of you mentioned you're afraid of turning in something wrong or missing a detail. Guess what? I'm afraid of posting something wrong. Of maybe missing a deadline. I misspeak, and I can't correct that as quickly as if we're in class and you're like, wait, you said that? I'm like, oh yeah. So I understand. I'm going to be patient with you. I've taken online classes, so I know it's a little wonky for you guys, and I will work with you. And I know that administration supports us on that, English department, all of us are wanting to really work with you guys. So we're on a learning curve too with some of these things. Now, with that, I know there were some other concerns, and this is always a big question. I've even discussed it in my program because it's an online program and because we focus so much on the humanities where you need that interaction. Does online learning make education less quality? It can. Depends on how you do it. But then there's also ways that it doesn't. So I wanted to just spit out a few thoughts on that. One thing that I was thinking about today as I was thinking about your questions and concerns was that was, you know what? Let's look at what's not different. So this stuff with the coronavirus, it's changed a lot. I didn't leave the house for a week, and even though I'm an introvert, I was about to pull my hair out. I was going to go see a friend, and I know this is a first world problem, but I was going to go see my best friend down in Alabama. I hadn't seen her in a while because she has actually been working in China, but she left and came home before all this stuff started. But I was going to go see her, and then I ended up, of course, not because we both were like, yeah, that's too much of a risk with, her family and my family, and we didn't want to accidentally be carriers, even though my last name is Carrier. Um, and so it changed that. We've been having to, again, communicate online, which isn't the same as being in person. I've thought a whole lot differently about my brother. I've had questions about things that before I probably would have looked at somebody and said, yeah, they're a germaphobe. But then you have to go, oh, okay, well, maybe I should listen. Um, and so it changes all of those things, but Angus turned 7 the other day, and we celebrated his birthday. And the way we celebrate birthdays at the Carrier House might be a little nerdy to you, but we focus on like good food. And then we have this thing with dressing up as different characters and having themed birthday parties. And we still did that when you turn 7 at the Carrier House, unless you're one of my Frady Cat brothers. And Angus is not one of them, but you get to watch the original Star Wars movie for the first time because my mom was 7 years old when it came out. So that's just a weird tradition. We still got to do that. And I had to say, okay, well, that's something that is still the same. Something that's simple, that's beautiful, that's the same. And so I translated that into learning. And what I came up with is reading is still reading, writing is still writing, math is still math. There's a lot of things that are the same. Things that are very, very old, and maybe it's a time to look at those old things and see what we can learn from them. Obviously, the method is very different. The personal connection, we miss that. There's a beautiful thing with that personal connection. Even with real homeschooling, your parent is your teacher, and so this is different because you still have that third party in the online component. But I want us to think of it maybe less as like a drastic difference, even though it is, and think of it as another first day, a big interruption. How do we normally handle that? Well, you handle that by building in small pieces. And then at the first, it seems slow, but especially someone recently said to me, when it comes to relationships, fast is slow and slow is fast. And I want us to think of it as a plane taking off. And that plane, you're going to take off slowly and you're going to have a little bit of turbulence as you're going up if you've been on a plane. And I'm sorry, Tim, I'm not a plane expert. I do want to get my pilot's license before I die, but it's expensive. So I'm going to have to wait till I'm like 90. But then you have a point where you level off and things get smoother. And then landing, we won't talk about that. But I want us to think of this as building something slowly, and not just for this 9 weeks, however long it is, but really for our own souls and characters, because that's the beauty of a classical Christian education. Classical Christian education, the purpose is to shape us into certain types of people. So that allows for a lot of opportunity, a lot of flexibility. A classical Christian approach would, of course, have to deal with the methods, but it would first have to deal with how is what I'm doing shaping the type of person that I am, especially that Christian component. How's it shaping me to be more like Christ? And so there's a big part of this that no person or situation can take from you. Now, I have a final thought. So I shared with you guys a quote from C.S. Lewis when we did our mock trial, and I did it. It was the end of The Weight of Glory, where he's talking about you've never met a mere mortal. And this last one I want to share is actually from Mere Christianity. It's from a section called Counting the Cost. It's towards the end of the book. And he's talking about, is Christianity hard? Is it easy? Is it about us becoming a decent person or a new person entirely? And so he borrows a parable from George MacDonald, and I want to leave us with this today. He says, imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. I want us to think about that with interruptions, with things not going the way that we would like for them to. Imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps, you can understand what he is doing. He is getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in the roof and so on. You knew that these jobs needed doing, and so you are not surprised. But presently, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of. Throwing out a new wing here, putting on an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. You thought you were going to be made into a decent little cottage. But he is building a palace. He intends to come and live in it himself. Have a wonderful Monday.